Hello, hello, good morning, everybody. So happy to see you all here. I should say good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. I'm just glad you're here. So thank you all for signing up for the Fun Size Challenge. My plan this morning is to talk through the first day's lesson and tasks a little bit, and then you can feel free to ask questions. Once I've talked through a bit of it, I'm going to stop and let you do some writing. If you're here just to get some writing done, feel free to turn your speaker off and ignore me and just enjoy being in a room with other writers who are going to be writing. So what we'll do is I'll talk for a little bit and then I'll set a timer and I will ask you just to write and work on your own stuff. And then at the end of the timer, I will come back and say, hey, how's it going? Any questions? And we can talk about the next little bit and go from there. So what you are attempting to do in a week is what people attempt to do every day in May. It's also what I spread out over 2 weeks in May and put other tasks in between. But I figured we could put all the writing tasks together and make this work in 5 days and go at a really good pace for getting a story done. So that's my plan for today. This is our rules for being in the StoryADay community and live events and things like that. It's basically, it's don't talk about writing club outside writing club. Don't use somebody else's ideas. We learn best when we trust each other. People may share vulnerable stories. These are not our stories to tell, so we don't share them. We're much more able to be creative when we feel safe. And that's what I'm always trying to do here, is create a place where people feel supported and safe to delve into the difficult work of writing, which is emotional and vulnerable and frankly quite hard. So be constructive, be generous. We are colleagues, not competitors. And if you ever have any problems, there's a link here where you can contact me anonymously or not, up to you, if you ever have a problem that you need to get resolved here. So, okay, I'm going to assume if you stay that you're okay with these rules. I am going to share over here this short story framework, which you should all have had access to already. This is going to be kind of our textbook for the week. The idea behind the short story framework is there really is a framework underneath, a structure underneath most stories that we tell, all stories that we tell. This is not the only structure for a short story, but it is a very simple one. It's a very familiar one. It's a very familiar Western short story structure, not just short story, but you could use this structure for films and novels and whatever else. Just each part would just get bigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with this. It helps you to stay on track, even if you're not an outliner. It helps to keep you from losing your way. You don't have to outline the whole thing at first. You can use this to deconstruct what you're writing and figure out where you've gone off track. You can use it to plan the next little bit. I'm a big fan of planning just as far ahead as I need. So I like to know where I'm going in the next scene, but it's sometimes the process of discovery is also fun. And then this can be a useful tool for figuring out what you've just done. What did I just build? Oh, okay, that's the middle bit, right? So the point of this, I'm going to scroll down so this is on your screen. What I want you to do today only is the first part. I want you to come up with your character and figure out who they are. And that's going to give you a lot about what the story is going to be about. And I know some people come in with an idea and some people struggle with the thought that they don't know what to write about. Like, what can I write about? What do I have to say? And if you just start with a character who's got an issue, and it could be something that you relate to, it could be something you don't relate to. But if you start with the character and their issue, it just gives you a lot more of the story. It gives you a lot of the plot, especially when you plug it into this structure. So starting with a character is wonderful because the character is the thing that makes us care about the story. So at the heart of every story, there's a character, but it's not just a character. It's a character who wants something. It's a character who needs something. These things are not necessarily the same thing. The character may not be aware of that. People around them might be aware of it. They may not know that what they want and what they need are different things. in which case a lot of what your story is going to be is them probably discovering that. They are going to need something that gets in their way. That's not written on this outline here, but by figuring out what they want, you'll figure out what you can put in their way. So what I want you to do first of all is just work on what kind of person would you like to write about this week? Would it be a woman? Would it be a non-binary character? Would it be a tree? Would it be a dragon? What kind of character do you want to work on? Could be a man, could be a middle-aged man, could be a young man, whatever you want to write about. Then you're going to start thinking about what adjective you're going to give them. So if, in my example in this, I decided for the example in this framework, I was going to write about an ambitious mummy. And then I talked about what she wanted. So she wants to get her kid accepted in a prestigious college. I came up with this example a couple of years ago when this was all in the headlines, when people were cheating to get their kids into college. So I was like, ooh, ambitious mummy. But the word ambitious really gives you like the picture. And now I'm starting to see her, and I'm starting to see what her house might look like. And I'm starting to see what she does at the weekends and how she dresses. Just from these two things, an ambitious mummy who wants to get her kid into a prestigious college. Now, that could be tons of people, could be people from any background, but in my head, I'm starting to see a particular person who I want to get into that. So I'm actually going to not take you on to the next part yet. I'm going to let you sit and write and think about that for a while. What I'm going to suggest that you do, we're going to come back and we're going to actually brainstorm the next couple of things on this today. I'll give you some time for that here as well. And you can keep working on it later. But we're going to stop about here. We're not going to get to that until towards the end of the story yet. So what I would like you to do is think about, and what I recommend you do is actually write a list of several, like 10 or 20 different types of people that you could write about, and then give them all adjectives. And then think about what that might do for your story. And I wouldn't even go as far as figuring out what they want yet. I want you to just go and make a list of people that might be interesting to you, like short person, tall person, childless person, person with kids, whatever you want to do, as I say, tree, dragon, dwarf, wherever you write, choose the types of people that you might find in the worlds you like to write in, and then go and write a list of people, and then write a list of adjectives that go with them. So that's where I am going to start. I'm going to stop sharing this so I can see all your lovely faces. Okay, there we go. So task for right now, and I'm going to give you probably 10 minutes to work on this, is to write a list of maybe 20 people that you might want to write a story about, woman, man, astronaut, dragon, whatever, and then put a list of adjectives and then start playing with which adjectives might go with which person. Is that clear? I am asking for 2 separate lists, I think, unless it makes sense to you to immediately do, ambitious mummy, angry tree, whatever like that, but I think if you write just a list of people and a list of adjectives, it could be fun to sort of mix and match them as you look at your lists. So any other questions? I'll put the instructions in the chat box as well once I stop talking. And so I'm happy to see you. And I do want to actually get you all I do want to find out more about all of you, but I'm going to let you start writing first because that's what you're here for. And I'm just being nosy. So, okay, set a timer for 10 minutes and away you go and discover who you want to write about this week. Great. Hopefully everybody has made a start on that. I think that's enough time for you to get a list of 20 people. And I love what Kathy put in the comments here, which was that the oddest character thus far was a sword swallower. And that is kind of why I asked you to write 10 or 20 different characters down, because it's very easy for me to come up with middle-aged white woman. But after I've got to number 11 on the list. I'm like, all right, where am I going? And you end up with a sword swallower. So fabulous. Would anybody like to unmute and let us know? In fact, I'm going to pause the recording here so that I see here. I'm going to record my bits, but I'm going to pause the recording here so that if you feel awkward being on screen, you don't have to worry about me showing you to the world later. So the next thing, now that you have got a character, I think it's really useful, and it's not on the short story framework, so I think I need to rework this a little bit, but I think it's useful to think about your setting, because your setting is going to impact the things that your character cares about. I think I said in the post today, if your story is set during the Industrial Revolution, then your character is not going to be particularly concerned about whether she's going to get the next iPhone upgrade, but they might be concerned about what the spinning jenny is going to do to the community that they live in. So your setting in time and space is going to have an impact on your story. So it can be really useful to think about where and when your story is going to be set. If you're writing a post-apocalyptic futuristic thing, then your character is going to want different things from if you're writing something, I don't know, set 10 years ago. So thinking about the setting is useful. And then we can get into the next bit on the short story framework, which is thinking about what your character might want. And again, you may have a sense now of which character you want to write about already. So you can just think about what they want right now. And a useful exercise for this can be to do something that Lisa Cron talks about in her book Story Genius, which is to actually spend a little bit of time thinking about where your character has come from. Because if your character has just sort of arrives on your page with no past, then how are you going to know who... Did I just mute myself? No. If your character arrives on your page with no past, you've just come up with them, how are you going to know how they react to anything? Like I react, I don't know, there are certain things which I will react in an outsized way to because somebody in my past ticked me off about them, right? They bullied me about it, or they made fun of me for it. And so you could make what seems like an innocuous remark to you, and I'm going to go over the top with my reaction. You're going to be like, what the hell is that about? So our characters, in order to make them realistic, it's worth spending a little time thinking about where they came from and then how that informs the thing that they want right now. I read a story once about a woman who was waiting for somebody to come to her front door. And that sounds like a terribly boring story. But when we got into the story itself, actually talked a little bit about her family and what was going. There was a scandal in her family, and the person coming to the door was going to be addressing that scandal. So, but you got a very clear sense of where this woman came from. This wasn't in the story so much, but the author clearly had a story of where this woman came from. She was an older woman. She was Irish. She was Catholic. And so from those things, I could deduce as a reader particular things about her values and opinions on things. So if you need, like, saying Irish Catholic old woman is kind of a shortcut, right? I would know exactly what that person's values would be. If your setting is a little more out there, if you're writing magical realism, if you've got characters that I can't automatically be able to make assumptions about, then it's useful for you to spend a little bit of time thinking about specifics of your character. And so I think we can start with, if I have an ambitious mummy, it's easy for me, that narrows down the number of things I think she's going to want to desire in her life and that I could play within a story. If you have a different character, that already narrows down your choices, which is a wonderful thing. Limits are wonderful for creativity and for helping us actually get anything done, because too many choices mean that we could write anything and we just get overwhelmed and paralyzed. So I want you to think a little bit about your setting and what that might mean. So like, and you could do combinations of these characters. If you haven't decided which one you want to play with yet, think about a setting you might like to write about. You know, it might be easier for you to write about a place you know, or a place you've already written about, maybe in another story. So think about your setting and what that might mean for these combinations of characters that you came up with. And the idea is just to like jot a bunch of stuff down so that you get a sort of gut feeling about which one you want to write about. And then I want you to think about desires for your top combinations of characters and adjectives, maybe for 3 of them, or 1 if you already know where you're going. So think about setting, think about their past, and think about what that does, what desire they might have in this story. And then when we come back from this next little break, I'm going to get you to think about a couple of other things, the tone of your story and the first action that might happen in your story. So I'm just going to give you 10 minutes to play with these ideas of setting and desire, and think about these for several of the combinations on your list, or just if you've picked one already that you want to write about, like your werewolves, then think about what that might do for them. So any questions before we go into this? I want you to think about setting and what that character might desire, and then also have a think about what in their past might have shaped that desire. Questions? All right, start a timer. And if you have any questions while you're writing, you can pop them in the chat and we'll come back and then we'll work on the next thing and then we can break for questions at the end. All right, happy brainstorming. Okay, that is 10 minutes of working on that. I know that was quite a lot of stuff. That seemed to go really fast for me. I don't know about the rest of you. All right, let me find my next little section I wanted to talk about. Oh, yes, tone. This is something as well that's not actually written out in the short story framework, I don't think, but I find it really helpful to figure out what tone I want my story to be in, the predominant tone of the story, because it's very easy once we start writing for the story to wander off, and we wander down little alleys and you know, maybe something dark happens and you find yourself heading off into a really depressing story and you hadn't really meant to write a depressing story, or maybe you had meant to write a depressing story but something funny happens and then you're like, oh, that's interesting, and your story becomes funny when you're like, that's not really what I wanted it to be. So having a sense now of who your character is and their issue, you probably somewhere in your mind have a sense of what kind of tone you want your story to have, whether it's uplifting, whether it's scary, whether it's a cautionary tale. So it's worth writing that down. It's also worth, and if you haven't done this exercise with me before, there's a writer's manifesto exercise I've done with some of the superstars where we think about the things that we like in the things that we read and the artists that we admire and the people that we admire. And we think about the commonalities that they have. And we write our own manifesto for our writing. And mine, for example, I love satire, but I realize that the things that I actually admire about the writing I read is when it's uplifting and hopeful. And satire, you know, it's clever and it's biting and I admire it, but I find that writing it kind of depresses me. It puts me in a very negative state of mind, and it's not what I want to be bringing to the world myself. So I will, when I'm starting a story, think about what tone I want it to have, whether I want it to be uplifting or funny or dark. Or, you know. I find that interesting, helpful, because it keeps you on track. And if you start going off down, if you start writing and your story is getting away from you, coming back to that tone can help. Now, having said that, it doesn't need, and it shouldn't stick to the same tone all the way through. I've always found sitcoms can make me cry much more effectively than dramas because they surprise me. They make me care about characters by making me laugh with them. And then all of a sudden something happens and I'm bawling. And I'm like, what? Which is, you know, so switching to the opposite tone during your story can be extremely effective. So if you've got a dark story, a moment of lightness can really brighten it and illuminate and give the reader some space. So your predominant tone, you want to think about, and then maybe think about what the opposite of that tone is if you've never thought about this before. Like this. So I had some humorous, lyrical, satirical, mystery, noir, hopeful, dystopian, moving, romantic, optimistic, pessimistic. Those are some of my examples that I had written down. And then, so think about that. Then the last thing that I'm going to encourage you to work on today is to think about the first action. We've already heard in the little discussion we had there that given your character's desire, it starts your brain serving up suggestions for obstacles to that desire. So what would a person with the attributes you've already given them, faced with their desire and an obstacle to it, what would they do? What would be their first thing that they did? And this doesn't have to happen on screen. For example, in Tobias Wolff's story, Bullet in the Brain, it's set in a bank. So clearly we never know why the man is there exactly, but clearly his desire is to do some banking business, take out some money, pay his bills, whatever it is. And his first action has been to go physically to the bank because that's what people used to do in the old days, i.e., like 15 years ago. So it can be as simple as that. It can be as mundane as that. Like the first action they take, which is reasonable for your character. That character is an everyday guy, and his reasonable for him. He's got a banking transaction he needs to do. He goes to the bank and he gets in the queue. And then, as is reasonable for him, as given the person he is, he gets irritated by everybody around him. So that's kind of the next thing that happens. He starts to act on that. So we're not even going as far as the next thing that happens. And because of that part of the short story framework, we're just thinking, what's the first thing that has happened? And the thing is, with Bullet in the Brain, all of that, I need to do a banking transaction. I need to go to the bank. I get to the bank. I get into the queue. That all happens off screen. That's all happened before the story starts. So this is just a kind of an exercise in thinking, what is my character doing to deal with their problem now? You may or may not end up putting this in the story. It may just be something that informs you may start at and because of that, you may start in the middle of the action. So tomorrow, little teaser for you here. I'm going to get you to actually write the opening of the story. And I'm going to ask you to start brainstorming and because of that. So tomorrow you're going to write, you're going to put your character in their setting. So this is what you're preparing for today. You're going to put your character in their setting. You're going to write that opening right up to the beginning of where the everyday sort of ends. And you're going to start brainstorming what they do because of where they find themselves in this moment, in this story, on this day. But that's for tomorrow. But this is what you're sort of working towards today. So while you're thinking about this, I want you to think about, what would a character with the attributes you've given them do to deal with their problem? What have they been doing all along? What is the thing that they've been doing that hasn't been working for them? And what might be the first action they take beyond that? Like, if you want, the old saying, if you want to change, then something has to change, right? Your actions have to change. That's what's going to have to happen in your story if things want to be different. So again, I want you to work in this 10-minute section on your tone. Think about the tone of the story you want to write. What do you admire? And if you need to think about what the stories and books and movies that you enjoy to get the kind of tone, the overall tone that you might want your story, like what moves you the most, and think about writing a story like that. And then think about what their first action would be. So in the short story framework, it's that so they, in the short story framework example, I have an ambitious mummy pursuing acceptance at a prestigious college for her kid. So she hires a tutor, but it doesn't help. So she hires a tutor. That's her first perfectly reasonable response to her situation. Okay. Is that clear what I'm asking you to do? Okay, getting some nods. Anybody have any questions before we get going? All right, again, I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to work on this, and then we'll come back, set a timer, work on your tone and your first action your character might take. Tomorrow will just be, you'll get an email from me. It'll take you to the exercises for writing this opening. I'm going to suggest that if this has been helpful today, think about what worked from here today, whether it was setting a timer, whether it was having a time in your calendar that you had to turn up for. Just think about what worked today and then try and replicate it as much as possible tomorrow. I will do more of these live events throughout the week once I think probably an evening and maybe another morning one. So I will email you about that. All right. Thank you everyone for being here and for sharing and being generous with your feedback.